Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie and today I'll be talking through what I read in the month of March. I read 17 books in the month of March and I read some really great stuff. I can't wait to tell you more about it. Before we get started, please remember to like this video and to subscribe to my channel if you want more. Let's get to the books. All right, so the first thing I finished this month ended up being my least favorite read for the month, and that was the essay collection Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. I wanted to read this because the essay Men Explain Things to Me is a very famous essay. It went viral when it first came out, and it popularized the term mansplaining. But after that first essay, which I thought was quite good, I got a little bored. I'm not sure if it was because of how literary the collection was. I didn't really sign up to read long essays about Virginia Woolf, or if it's just that I've read so many excellent essay collections that are about feminism and women's rights. I don't know. It just wasn't for me. I ended up giving it a generous 3 out of 5 stars. I had much better luck with the second book that I finished in March, which was Moxie by Jennifer Mathieu. This is a YA contemporary novel that came out a few years ago and has a lot of complimentary buzz. Plus, it just got its own Netflix adaptation, but I needed to read the book before I could watch the movie. So this is about Viv, who lives in a small town in Texas and is just keeping her head down through high school so she can escape this town and move to a bigger city. She stumbles upon some Riot Girl memorabilia of her mother's and is inspired to make her own zine, calling out the sexist culture in her high school. I found this to be very empowering. I love that feminist YA is becoming its own sort of subgenre. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I did watch the movie and it was a pretty good adaptation. It was, your standard teen girl sort of movie. Probably like 3 out of 5 stars for the movie. All right, the next book I finished in the month of March was The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. I started this one at the end of February and I discovered that this is a book you want to take your time with. You do not want to rush through this. It's very beautifully written, particularly for a debut. So this book follows Isaiah and Samuel, 2 enslaved young men who are in love with each other on a plantation in the Deep South. This book was so well written. Every chapter is a different perspective, and you don't get the same perspective very often, maybe 2 or 3 times, but I was still able to follow the story really well, and the love story was definitely at the center of the narrative. This was a hard read. I would say content warning for sexual assault because bodily autonomy and consent is a big theme throughout this novel. I loved it. I thought it was a beautiful love letter to queer people throughout history who have been erased from the historical narrative. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I listened to Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This one was on my radar from when it won the Man Booker Prize a few years ago, and I discovered that it is a part of the Audible Plus catalog, which means that if you have Audible, you can listen to it for free. Plus, my friend Lauren read it for one of her Black History Month reads, and she loved it, so I thought, for Women's History Month, why not read a book about Black British womanhood? This is an extremely wide-ranging narrative. There are 12 different Black British women in this story, so it spans about 100 years and different countries and different generations of women, and it was stunning. It was beautifully written. I loved every single character that we got to experience, and I loved how she tied them all together. I am discovering that I don't know that much about what it's like to be Black and British, and this was a really great glimpse into that experience, and I'm excited to learn more about that. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. It was wonderful. The next book I finished in the month of March was Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. As the weather has gotten warmer, I've really been craving more romance in my life, and this one has gotten so much hype on Goodreads. It's been compared a lot to Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, which was one of my favorite reads from 2020. And this one was just as good, in my opinion. I listened to it over one weekend, and it was one of those cases where I was looking for more chores to do in my house so I could keep listening to this audiobook. So this is about a hot mess of a young man named Luke. whose parents are celebrities. Luke finds that he is in need of a respectable boyfriend because the place where he works is not too happy about all of the paparazzi publicity he's got going on for his sort of messy personal life. So he enlists Oliver, who is sort of comes off as a stick in the mud at first, at least to Luke, to be his nice, respectable boyfriend. So obviously they go from being fake boyfriends to wanting to be real boyfriends. I thought this was so sweet, and I loved both of the characters. Both Luke and Oliver end up being hot messes in their own way, but in a very relatable way. I loved them both. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished in March will be a big surprise to some of you, and that was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I love this story. It's one of my all-time favorites. I was obsessed with the different movie versions when I was a kid. I have Christmas ornaments of all the March sisters. I love the musical. Don't even get me started on the 2019 movie. It's like one of my favorite movies of all time. So I decided that it was time to read the source material. So if you are unfamiliar, this is a classic coming-of-age story about the 4 March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, that takes place around the Civil War in the United States. Comment down below and let me know who your favorite March sister is. When I was a kid, it was definitely Jo, but I'm loving Amy more and more as I grow up. I think the book and the 2019 movie do a much better job with Amy than the versions that I was more familiar with as a kid. And Amy doesn't get enough credit. She's a fierce, independent woman. Overall, I liked this book. It gets a little bogged down with religion, so I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Another romance that I enjoyed this month was You Had Me At Ola by Alexis Daria. I have been trying to explore romance novels written by women of color, and this is one of the first romance novels by a Latinx author that I have read. Plus, look at this cover. I love it. I love everything about it. So this book is about Jasmine Lynn Rodriguez, who's a soap opera actress who has just gotten her big break as part of a show on a popular streaming service. She has a leading lady plan. She's not going to get involved with any more boys and end up on the tabloid covers. So of course, the first thing she does when she steps onto the set of this new show is fall hopelessly in love with her handsome co-star. This was very sweet. The characters had a lot of great chemistry. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I will definitely read more books by this author. Next up, I listened to Wundersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend on Audible. This is the second book in the Nevermore series, which I adore. I adore these books. The third one just came out, so I decided to do a reread of the series. If you like Harry Potter, you need to read these books. They are whimsical, they're great characters, they're great issues that are discussed, the fantasy setting is just fantastic. They're everything. I love them so much. So this series is about Morrigan Crow, a girl who has always been told that she is cursed and doomed to die on her 11th birthday. But on that day she's supposed to die, she is instead whisked away by this eccentric red-headed man named Jupiter North to a magical city called Nevermore, where she is told that she'll be trying out to get into a school called the Wondrous Society. I love these books so much, and if you love Harry Potter, you will love them too. Someone needs to read them so they can talk to me about them, because I am the only person I know who's read these books. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This next book that I finished in March was a very tough read, but it's a very important read as well. And that was Genesis Begins Again by Alicia D. Williams. This is a middle grade contemporary novel about Genesis, a girl who's struggling. Let's just say that. Her dad is an alcoholic and seems like he has a bit of a gambling addiction. And because of that, they're evicted from their homes on a regular basis. So she's very housing insecure. And she also experiences bullying based on her skin tone because she's very dark skinned. So this is a book about bullying, about colorism, about finding your sense of self-worth as a young person, which I think will really resonate with a lot of younger readers. There's also a really great choir teacher in this book, and that always makes me happy because I'm a music teacher. This was stunning. It was hard to read, and I definitely felt a lot of teacher feels and ended up crying quite a bit. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. It was lovely. Next up, one of the book clubs that I'm in, Coffee with Books, read The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson this month. This is a debut, and it takes place in Indiana, which is why I picked it for my book of the month a couple months ago. So this story follows Ruth, who, when she was a teenager, got pregnant and gave up her baby for adoption. And she finds that before she can start her own family now as an older, successful Black engineer, she needs to go back to her Indiana hometown and figure out what happened to that child that she gave up. This takes place right after Obama was elected in 2008, which I thought was a really cool time period for this. So there was a lot of really great discussion on race and class in the era of Obama. It takes place in a fictionalized Gary, Indiana. So there's a lot of talk about industrialization and the Great Recession and factory towns. It was really cool, especially for a debut. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read a gorgeous British romance called Flatshare by Beth O'Leary, the Flatshare, at my friend Jordan's suggestion. This is a dual perspective romance that follows Tiffy, a girl who really needs a cheap place to live, and Leon, who needs a little bit of cash. So Leon agrees to share his apartment with Tiffy. Tiffy will work during the day and sleep in the apartment at night and on the weekends. And Leon, who works nights, will sleep during the day and stay with his girlfriend on weekends. This was a wonderful book. Like, that's already a cute premise by itself, but the secondary characters are so lovable and you get to know them. And there's a lot of emotional depth in this book that you don't always get with romances. Tiffy is just coming out of an abusive relationship where there was a lot of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. And Beth O'Leary just handles that so carefully and so respectfully. And it ends up being a very empowering book. I love the couple. I love Tiffy and Leon. Everything about this book was wonderful. 5 out of 5 stars for this one, for sure. I also read 2 historical romances this month. The first one was book 2 in the Wallflower series by Lisa Kleypas, and that was It Happened One Autumn. And then I also read book 3 in the same series called Devil in Winter. Lisa Kleypas, in my opinion, is even better than Julia Quinn. If you like the Bridgerton story and if you've read the Bridgerton books, please read Lisa Kleypas. She is a queen. And this series is about a group of girls that call themselves the Wallflowers, who for various different reasons are having trouble in the marriage mart, which is of course what historical romances set in England are all about. So in book 2, we follow Lillian Bowman, who is an American heiress, but she's from New Money. So she is looking for a British husband so she can add a title and help her family's social standing. She ends up with Lord Westcliff, who's very traditional and does everything by the book and doesn't know quite what to do with this American who doesn't know any of the British social rules. This was so cute. Oh my gosh, gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then book 3 follows Evie, who has a terrible stammer and who is basically being abused by her mother's family. Her mother ran off with a very unsuitable man and then died giving birth to her. So she's been sort of held captive by her mother's family and not treated very well. And she ends up in a marriage of convenience with St. Vincent, who is a notorious rake, but who is short on cash and needs money, which she has. They end up getting to know each other by renovating her father's gaming club. Like we said, her father was very unsuitable for her mother and is not in the aristocracy. So they take over this gaming club and they fall in love, and it's beautiful. And this was my favorite in the series so far. Gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. Love this series. Love Lisa Kleypas. Man, I just read a lot of really great middle grade this month. The next book I finished was The List of Things That Will Not Change by Rebecca Stead. This book follows Bee, a girl whose parents have been divorced ever since her father came out to their family as gay. So because of that, her parents still get along very well and they co-parent very well, but she goes back and forth between their houses every other day. So she suffers from a lot of anxiety. And when her father announces that he will be marrying his partner, Jessie, she's excited, but also has to figure out how this will fit into her life that already causes her a lot of anxiety, because now she'll have a new stepdad as well as a new stepsister who she's never met. This was so sweet. It was very character driven, but I think it was one of the best portrayals of anxiety in children that I've read in a long time. I think my struggle with anxiety and depression began in middle school, so I wish I had had a book like this because I would have recognized myself in B. This was so wonderful and sweet, and also yay for normalizing blended families and gay parents and step families that aren't stereotypical. It was so, so good. Gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. All right, the last romance novel I finished this month was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the 3rd book in the Brown Sisters series, which have all been so, so, so wonderful. So this book follows Eve Brown, the youngest Brown sister, who is a hot mess, but she is determined to prove to her family that she can find a job without their help. And she ends up stumbling across this B&B that's in need of a chef. She interviews for the job, but then ends up running the owner over with her car and breaking his arm. The owner, Jacob, is left without any choice and ends up hiring her to help him run this B&B while he recovers. This is definitely a Sunshine One meets Grumpy One sort of book, and they just work so well together, and Talia Hibbert does such a great job at developing both characters. This is an own voices autism narrative. I didn't realize Talia Hibbert was on the spectrum herself, so that is always really cool to see autism rep in romance. Gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. Wonderful. Probably my favorite in the series. Next up, I read Queerstory, an infographic history of the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. This was, look at this cover. I picked this one up on the library new releases shelf, and this was a great introduction to the history of the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. It does focus on the 20th century and the 21st century, so if you're interested in older history, this might not be the book for you, but it's full of really cool graphics like this and biographies of different activists. I love that it focused on a lot of non-Western activists as well, like activists in Asia and Africa. If you are looking to give a gift to someone or learn a little bit more about queer history yourself, I would highly recommend this. It was very easy to read and I learned a lot. Gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Finally, the last book I finished in March was Saigon by Phuc Tran. And this is a memoir about Phuc, whose family escape Vietnam and end up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Side note, I did not realize the pun in this title, Saigon, until I heard him read it, and then I felt like a dum-dum, because obviously they're Vietnamese. Anyway, so Phuc is a kid who's trying to figure himself out and where he fits in the story of Asian American immigrants, in the story of Vietnam, in the story of small-town American life. So it ends up being about punk rock and about being a literary nerd and about generational differences and anti-Asian racism. It's just like a little bit of everything. But because he reads the memoir and because the memoir itself is so well written, it just feels like you're getting to know a new friend. I thought this was really enjoyable. I want to read more Asian American voices this year. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. All right, that is all I read this month. Thank you for sticking with me. I read a lot. I promise I don't read this much every month. I've just had a very good couple of months. Comment down below if you have read any of these books or if you have any recommendations for me based on the books that I read in the month of March. And for now, that's all she read.